Back. Can you take your place, please? Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoy your coffee break. For those who don't know me, my name is Oscar Huerta. I'm a project manager at the Cities, Urban Policy and Sustainable Development Division. I'm gonna moderate this session now. For this session, it's about what we have learned of all these years of digitalization. What are the policy lessons that we can draw from all these years of experience? Because digitalization is not new. Cities have been involved in this process of digital transition for a long time. So the idea is to take a stock of what we have learned from all these years of experience that can help us to improve the process for the future, perhaps to share lessons of what to do, what not to do with other cities in the process of the digital transition. And for that, we have a number of questions that we would like to address in the session that you can see in the agenda that was prepared for this meeting. So first of all is what lessons cities have learned in promoting digitalization for sustainable urban development. The next one is what changes in urban governance are needed to stimulate the digital transition in medium and small-sized cities, which is something that we started the discussion in session one. And the next one is what role should educational institutions and the private sector play in advancing the digital transition in cities of all sizes. So as in the first session, to start the discussion, we will have I have the pleasure to invite Anthony Townsend, who is a senior research associate from Cornell University, for a keynote to set the scene for our panel discussion. Anthony, unfortunately, cannot be here with us directly, but he is joining us virtually from the United States. Anthony, and we thank you for getting up so early to stay with us. For him, I think it's 5 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I think so. So thank you so much for that. Anthony, you have the floor.
Great. Hello, everyone. Sorry that I couldn't join you in person, but I did want to take this opportunity just to share a few thoughts about the questions that Oscar raised. If we could go to the next slide, zero in on some work that I did in 2015, almost 10 years ago now, with Stephen Lorimer, Dr. Stephen Lorimer, who at the time was at Imperial College, but went on after this work to lead the Smart London planning project, the digital master plan. I'm not sure what's going on with the screen right now. Is it possible to get the next slide?
Just give us a second, please. I think
sure.
We're having a technical problem with the slides.
So what was happening at the time around 2013, 2014, this is 10 years ago now, is that a first group of cities, places like New York, Dublin, Chicago, and London, had undertaken a new strategic planning activity that we had never seen before, which is to produce what we think of as digital master plans. These were comprehensive, long-range efforts to plan their investments and their policy actions around digitalization. And at the time, we had seen about 8 of these plans. You could go to the next slide. And it was for the most part limited to really a handful of global cities that were almost all reacting to each other. So New York was the first that we saw. London quickly responded, Chicago, and then the others kind of followed. And what we're trying to do in this paper in 2015 was really to understand what this emerging strategic practice consisted of. Why was it being undertaken? How was it being undertaken? And how was it being implemented? So the study looked at, if I recall, 8 different plans, really trying to catalog the content. So what were the actual subjects of policymaking and planning? What was the process that these cities were using? who was consulted in the plan making and how were they consulted, and then the implementation. What was the approach to putting the plan into practice, and what resources and powers were involved? And our conclusions at that time, it was still quite early, was essentially that this was definitely a new practice that was being established, but it wasn't clear how far it would spread, whether it would be sustained. Would these digital master plans continue as standalone processes and documents? Very, very few of them had any statutory basis. They were basically, kind of, we thought of like politically driven in many ways. They weren't being driven in response to laws like sustainability plans, transport plans, or land use plans. And then ultimately how effective they would be. These were often not well funded, or even efforts that were given a tremendous amount of authority. So if you could continue to the next slide, please. We did some preliminary efforts to sort of catalog the scope and the subject matter of these plans, using a scheme of 7 or 8 different categories. And really, I don't have time to go into the depth here, but what you can see is that there was just a tremendous variability in the way these plans were being undertaken. In stark contrast to, say, transport plans, which, if you're in San Francisco or Seoul or Stockholm, more or less look the same. It's a standard international methodology. This is something that there was a lot of experimentation going on, and not a lot of similarity. Next slide, please. What happened shortly after that is that we started to see private interests start undertaking planning on smart cities that moved into some of the gaps that these plans had left. And I think the other big way in which smart cities have been delivered over the last decade has been through private real estate development in large mega projects around the world. And here you can see the plan, the 1,500 plus master plan that was undertaken by Sidewalk Labs for the Toronto Quayside project, which was eventually canceled during the pandemic. But this really represented, I think, a kind of massive power shift in planning smart cities. And the big gap that it was moving into was articulating a clear and detailed vision of how digitalization would be woven into the physical infrastructure of the city and the long-term physical development of the city. Sorry, that was it for me. Okay. Can we just go back to that for 1 second? It's just reading the chat. But I think the key lesson here is this was just a massive overreach of authority by this private developer, even though they did have public sector partners. And if anybody's interested in a fascinating debrief of that, I highly recommend a book by Josh O'Kane called Sideways, the city that Google couldn't beat, which sort of really digs into the whole political backstory of this process and why eventually Sidewalk was asked to leave. But again, I think this really raised the bar in terms of the amount of effort and detail and comprehensiveness for smart city planning. Next slide, please. So what I've done with my students over the last few years at Cornell Tech, as we've launched our master's program in urban technology, is to document these plans all around the world. We've been collecting them in a site called the Atlas of Urban Tech. And if you go in there, you will find a growing collection of about 50 plans of both types. Municipal digital master plans created by city governments, as well as plans being developed by private property interests for development parcels around the world. And I think it's really interesting to see how these two mechanisms are being used to advance urban digitalization. Next slide, please. And I just close with a couple of thoughts about where I see this smart city planning movement evolving over the last few years. The first, and I think the most promising, is that this has not remained a big global city activity. We see smaller, mid-sized cities, even very tiny cities like West Hollywood in California on the left there, Vienna, Montreal. My collection of these plans now has almost 100 items. So this is something that has really become quite widespread. And because it's very effective, it allows cities to consolidate and clarify what they mean when they talk about digitalization, and to memorialize that. And I think the most fascinating thing has been that it, for large part, does continue as a standalone planning activity. There are places where you have seen this activity be mainstreamed into broader city plans, or where it's died out. It's been done one or two times and not continued. But for the most part, cities that undertake this do maintain it as a distinct activity, like sustainability planning. And then they do also continue to update and revise the plans and evaluate their progress. Next slide. So I think the rise of national networks of various types in countries around the world has also been a really promising and effective tool for spreading and creating capacity for planning. The Open North Consortium in Canada has done quite robust technical assistance for many years for municipalities. Created model plans and policies that are adopted widely throughout the country. And similarly, in Denmark, the OS2 network has created essentially a consortium for implementation with a strong emphasis on open source. And I think is one of the most robust networks for creating capacity for open source digitalization, and in a very strategic way. This isn't just about procuring open source technology, although that's a big part of what OS2 does. It's also about strategically moving the whole cohort of cities forward. And notably also has like almost fully enrolled the entire municipal network in Denmark. Next slide, please. Oscar asked about the role of universities. I don't have that much to say beyond, I believe and see universities playing a massive role. In the United States, we have a quite effective consortium called Metro Lab Network, which was established about 10 years ago and now enrolls close to 100 research universities that are deeply involved with their city governments in collaborative research. And I think that's where the university can really provide a lot of momentum, is not just on the technology side, but also on the urban planning side. Next. So I'll stop there. I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion. I encourage all of you to visit the Atlas of Urban Tech, take a look at the case studies that we have put together. There actually is a mechanism for contributing case studies. And we also have a list of prospective case studies, which are plans in districts that we've identified, but we haven't actually fully built out yet. So we welcome contributions and suggestions about where we should take that work next. I'll turn it back over to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for this presentation. Yes. Thank you so much. I would like to see if in the room there is any question to Anthony now. This is the moment. I do have a couple of questions. For the time being, Anthony, I would like to start perhaps just with a couple of questions. The first one is, you mentioned in your presentation that there are medium and small size cities have been developing these digital plans. Have you observed any difference in the plans between medium and small size cities? In the morning, one of the Japanese professors was mentioned that there was a different approach to smart cities in Japan. Large cities were kind of more focused on innovation, and the smaller cities were more using digital technologies for survival, to tackle depopulation. I would like to know whether you have observed any similar pattern with these digital plans in mid and small size cities. That would be one question. And the other one would be, you mentioned in one of your slides the concept of open smart cities. What is open smart city? What's different to what we know as a smart city? What makes it open, basically?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. So I think openness has a couple different dimensions. the open data aspect of it is something that I think is well established. Most people are probably familiar with. Cities really, I think, led the open data movement in government since its inception about 15 years ago and have continued to lead. But more recently, where we have seen a lot of interest and excitement is in the use of open source software to create the digital infrastructure for cities. And most importantly, what we have seen is networks of cities working together to produce that software. We published a study 2 years ago that was funded by Ford Foundation. That was the title was Orchestrated Development. I can share the URL in the chat after the Q&A. And we were looking at these networks like O2, others in Canada, in the US, in the UK, local gov Drupal in the UK, where cities are actually combining their efforts to procure and develop open source software. They're creating intellectual property. I mean, it's a really virtuous cycle of development. And I think, especially as the urban digitalization movement moves into less kind of digital services delivered on the web and more IoT applications that are embedded in infrastructure, this is something that's they're going to need that capacity. And particularly as cybersecurity becomes more of a kind of critical pillar of how these strategies are conceived and rolled out, they're going to need that scale in order to be effective. The other thing that becomes really important is that open source software is not written by volunteers, despite whatever myths there may be. The bulk of it is produced by professional engineers working in industry, and that costs money. And so one of the really effective strategies that has come out of these open source city networks is developing sort of pools of vendors who have shared values, who are often local firms working in those cities, living in those countries, and who can actually do the heavy lifting of writing open source code and deploying it and maintaining it. And that is something that I think moves us from kind of like a crowdsourcing type strategy to a really serious professional industrial scale IT strategy. So I've been very encouraged by that. In terms of the small and mid-sized cities question, I see the plans that are coming out of small and mid-sized cities to be incredibly creative for them because they're able to get everyone in the same room. One of the things that we found when we looked at those global city plans in the beginning was that for the large part they were not produced by representative groups of people, unless extreme efforts were undertaken to broaden participation. New York's report, if you read our paper, was produced by a very small group of very connected people in the tech sector. Others, are more bureaucratic in nature. There are exceptions. Both London and Chicago in that era went to great pains to broaden participation. And Chicago even had a mechanism for taking the citywide plan and developing neighborhood specific versions of it. But for the most part, I see that the sort of level of inclusion in the smaller and mid-sized cities plans is much higher. And as a result, I think they tend to be better from a equity point of view. And then when it comes to implementation, it's also clearer and more direct about how various pieces of those plans get picked up by stakeholders and carried forward. And so what you'll see often in the smaller plans is a much clearer assignment of, the university will do this, the city government will do this, a private sector stakeholder will do this, civil society organizations will do this, simply because the size of the network of stakeholders involved is smaller. And so, yeah, I think the comment about innovation versus survival is on the mark, but there are are also some quite important process innovations coming out of these smaller mid-sized cities. And my personal favorite, I'll just make one more remark, was Dublin's 2013 digital master plan included a very clever rubric called the Digital Maturity Scorecard that they proposed be used to set goals and then measure progress against those goals over time. And it was actually a tool taken from industry, the IT industry, and I think quite effective in setting a very ambitious goal and then committing the city to measuring progress over time. And it was a very risky move that I don't think you would have seen in a big city because they were able to have a strong leader lead that planning process.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these inputs, Anthony. I see a question from the International Transport Forum for you. And after that question, we'll move to our panel discussion. Another one from UNEP. So please, if you could introduce.
Thank you very much. My name is Maliki Fernando. I'm with the International Transport Forum. We're another OECD body. Thanks, Anthony, for your presentation. I had a question on, you mentioned these digital master plans and how they're, of course, separate to existing plans like land use plans or transport plans that perhaps have a greater, longer history in urban planning. We also heard from speakers during the previous session the importance of digitalization not being kind of the end, but more of a means to the end to bring about greater sustainability, health and well-being for citizens, et cetera. Could you reflect a little bit on how these digital plans interface with some of the more traditional plans, whether it's transport, land use, et cetera? Is it a matter of, do they exist kind of parallel and then, or is it one trying to implement some of the solutions that are in another? If you could just talk a little bit about the planning and the implementation, I suppose, of these plans.
Yeah, it's
before you take this one, maybe we can take the question from the environment.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my question is very similar. It's around my name is Sharon Hill, and I work for the UN Environment Program. My question is very much related to the earlier question. I wanted to ask, how have the digital plans evolved and the purpose of the digital plans, and which plans are they most connected with in terms of the traditional planning? I imagine you mentioned cybersecurity as an emerging trend, for example. Do you see other emerging trends in your analysis?
Yeah, so I'll answer the last question first because it's the easiest. I think there's a sort of seismic shock around artificial intelligence right now that the same cohort of cities that jumped into digital master planning are trying to figure out whether they need to do and how to do a standalone AI plan, which I think is both shows a lot of foresight, but also shows a lot of panic, I guess. And the reason I say it's panic is that like this practice of digital master planning has already created a vehicle for addressing that in a state of calmer, more method, and jumping to create an AI task force and issue an AI plan sort of takes them back to an era when they weren't as sophisticated and weren't as deliberate and methodical in assessing technology developments and risks and addressing them through these planning processes. So I've been watching it with a little bit of like delight and saying, oh, wow, they created the capacity to really respond here and get ahead of industry. And at the same time thinking, but they've also allowed themselves to be sort of knocked off their feet. So there's certainly a lot of plan making going on. It's not clear yet like what the impact will be and even how it will connect to these digital master plans, let alone a broader set of plans. As far as the question about why have these plans remained standalone? How do they connect back to other types of planning, other planning processes? I think the impact has been just to sort of trigger, and this was the desired impact, was to trigger these more institutionalized forms of planning that often have a statutory basis, often have quite robust, dedicated funding streams committed to them, has really just been to sort of, I think, push them along, to raise the bar, to provoke them to get better. Many of these plans, I would say, are, like, they're political creatures. They're advanced by elected officials who are trying to reinforce the perception that they're innovative, that they're future focused, that they're interested in creating opportunities through technology. And that message gets broadcast down through civil services and stakeholder networks that are involved in these more traditional forms of plan making. And so I think that's actually a really valuable function. I think it would probably be a mistake to institutionalize digital master planning as a separate activity, because then it might lose some of its ability to maneuver, to innovate methodologically, to tackle new topics, and to not be boxed in. And so I think thinking of this activity as a catalyst that also transcends institutional silos and can frame and ask questions that cut across these existing power structures, I think is really valuable for cities. In the same way that sustainability plans have done that, for 20 years now, sort of confronted, organizations and government with the need to think strategically with, across silos.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Anthony, and thank you for your questions. I think we can move now to our panel discussion and then also continue the discussion with Anthony if he stays with us for the entire session. So with this background, I would like to introduce the members of our panel discussion for today. We have Ms. Mira Lee, who is a Deputy Director at Urban Policy Division in the Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport in Korea. We have Mrs. Renata Mitterhuber, I hope I pronounced it well. He's the Head of Division of Smart Cities and Regions at the Federal Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building of Germany. We also have Mr. Corey Gray, the President of the Smart Cities Council, who has here with us. And our four-member panelist is Mr. Let's see if I pronounce it well. David Overy, thank you. Overy, he is the Chief Office, he's the Head of the Office for the European Union of UN Habitat in Brussels. So thank you all for joining us, for being here with us for this panel. So the question, I would like to start with Korea, with Mirai, with the first question. So Korea, who has been one of the champions of smart cities here at the OECD, has been supporting the work. So we know a little bit what is happening in Korea. So Korea has been at the forefront of digitalization of cities for many years. It has used smart city strategies to foster urban regeneration, for example, in many cases, through this Korea's New Deal program. So Mirai, based on this accumulated experience that you have, what are the policy lessons that we can take from all that you could share with other countries and cities that they want to continue or to foster the process of digitalization? What would be your main policy recommendations from Korean experience? Over to you.
Okay. Can you hear my voice? Okay. Hi, I'm Mira Lee, District of Mori, Korea. Mira. And I'd like to share.
I think you have some problems with the sound. Maybe your microphone is a problem because we hear you not very well.
Can you hear my voice?
There's a lot of interference. No? I don't know whether it's here in the room or with your microphone. Do you have headsets?
Oh, just a moment.
No, I'm afraid. Do you have any headphones? Okay, so while we get Mire back, we'll move to the next speaker, Renate Mitterhuber. So Renate, the same question goes for you. What we have learned from digitalization, because Germany has also a very extensive program and a network of smart cities, and it's been promoted this for a number of years. What we have learned that you could share with other countries?
Yeah, good morning. We learned a lot in Germany, and the journey in Germany started in 2016 when the federal government set up the National Dialogue Platform Smart Cities, a comprehensive multi-stakeholder process to develop fundamental principles that guide our way towards common good-oriented smart cities. The result was codified in the Smart City Charter. It's this, I brought it from, it's like a constitution for smart city, for the Smart City program in Germany. And yeah, I think that's the basics, designing principles that was as an essential step to build the basis for the further efforts. And then second, we operated these principles in the national funding program, our program Model Project Smart City, MPSC. The principles were, for example, leave no one behind, public money, public code, a strict open source focus and data sovereignty. And with that, we launched a very ambitious funding program. I'm very happy about that because at the moment, the budget on the national level is completely empty. But in 2018, well, it was about that time, the government launched a program with 800 million euros and 3 episodes, 2019 and 20 and 21. Altogether, 73 smart city model projects are now funded for a long time. The first 2 episodes for 7 years, 2 years strategy, 5 years operating the solutions, and the third episode, 5 years, 1 year strategy and 4 years realizing the solutions. So that is great and that is unique, and we're supported by this management, by the Coordination and Transfer Office, which is a consortium of different Fraunhofer institutes, not that one, but 2 other ones, and organization for DIFO, Deutsches German Institute for Urbanistik, and others, Prognos for evaluation, and so on. And that is responsible for managing the knowledge diffusion and facilitating the replication of solutions for all municipalities within Germany, because of course 800 million is a lot of money for 73 municipalities. And the main question now is to scale the knowledge to all over the 11,000 municipalities in Germany. And of course, we do scientific publications. My colleague is here from the research side, and we are inspired by our International Smart Cities Network. Brazil is one of the members. And of course, Connected in Europe, we had our meeting yesterday. So what about the funding program? The third step is to anchor all that knowledge in the municipalities. They are all grounded on the same fundamental principles, but they have now, the funded municipalities, the opportunity to adapt it to their specific requirements and local circumstances. So they all have the same ethics and base, but they can build their own topics on that. And it was important for us that it is a whole strategy for the municipality and not an individual collection of separated solutions. A particularly important factor for anchoring smart city topics in a municipality is the close involvement of the political and strategic management level. This has proven to be key to success, and at the same time, it is essential to establish a close link between the smart city teams and the specialist departments of a municipality. We heard about the silos of the different departments, and it's important to overcome these silos. We try to support, of course, small and medium-sized cities. My division is called Smart Cities and Smart Regions. The funding program started as funding program Smart Cities, but it's in fact, it's all about small municipalities and mid-sized municipalities. This is the main, most of them are small or mid-sized. Yeah, and what is also, I think you said, it's about invest in our people. And that's also very different for the program, is that investing in internal training for personnel, especially in smaller municipalities, is important because they have a lack of resources and lack of competences. So especially when it comes to knowledge management and the procurement of specialized smart city solution, it is challenging but desirable to have the required skills available in-house. So now we have a treasure of different solutions, and then the next step, we have 11,000 cities and communities. And the scaling of these solutions is not a simple process. Yeah, we have to develop, my state secretary said it in this introduction this morning, a step-by-step plan, smart cities and smart regions in the last 12 months. Yeah, one of the challenge in Germany is that we are a really federal system, you know about that, and the federal level cannot support the municipalities directly. So we are very dependent from the support from our 16 Länder, our states, Bavaria and so on, North Rhine-Westphalia. And so we have to support each other, the federal level and the 16 Länder, to support at the end, of course, the municipalities. And for that, we have two measures, a competence center and a marketplace for solutions. I start with the marketplace. There are a lot of marketplaces, but this one is also existing from another funding program from another ministry. It's called Germany Digital, Deutschland Digital, and it contains public and private tools, tools from the private sector. And this is something, well, quite new, because the whole approach started to be a bit to go on a distance with the only technological approach 10 years ago. So it was, well, we want this open source topic because we want to avoid the dependence, vendor lock-in solutions and so on. But now the economy, the organizations of the IT economy, and also the organization of the municipalities said in this process, we want an overview of all solutions, because it's easier for us to have a big overview of all possible solutions so that we can choose what we want to integrate. And the strong wish was to have on the organizational side a competence center for all kind of questions around digitalization of municipalities, especially for the smaller municipalities, it's about legal questions, it's about procurement, it's about this and it's about that. And that would be very helpful, set the smaller municipalities to have like that competence center. So we want to do that. And we need, as I said, the commitment of all the 16 states, the commitment also for financing. And that's the journey for me in the next month, and I hope not years, to go to the the conferences of the different ministers, 4 conferences with 16 ministers of the states. And this, yeah, is of course a long journey, but we have to do it if we want to, if the target is to get a whole national strategic approach for smart cities and regions. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Thank you very much, Renata, and also for the input, the different points you highlighted. I think this issue of scaling up is a very crucial one, because this is why many smart city initiatives many times fail, because they are unable to scale up. I mean, we call it smart cities when it's also just, we are talking just about a small neighborhood sometimes in the city. And that is not a smart city, just perhaps just a neighborhood. How to scale it up, to make it part of the entire city, that's the main challenge that we can see. Thank you very much for that. I would like to check whether Rae we have already sorted out the problem with the sound. Could you please go ahead?
Okay, can you hear my voice? No.
A little bit. Okay, continue.
Can you hear my voice?
No, I'm afraid no. I think we have with your microphone. Yeah. Do you have any microphone, headphones, or anything? I don't know.
Oh, sorry, I don't have any other microphone.
Okay, let's see if we can sort it out. And then in the meantime, I'll move to my next speaker, or my next panelist. In this case, I move to the Smart Cities Council with Corey Gray. That has been working on the smart cities for a while, for a long time. So Corey, what we have learned from you? What's your experience in promoting digitalization? Any policy lesson that you can share with us?
Thank you, Oscar. And the first thing I would say is thanks for bringing up this topic for Smart Cities Council. We have people in over 70 countries and a global task force focused on remote and regional and Indigenous communities, which is a topic through Central and Latin America and my home country, which is very important. What we do know is if people can stay in their communities and in their cultures, their social outcomes are much better. And so the strategic delivery of all sorts of help, whether it's digital infrastructure or whether it's access to education or policy, is meaningful. I work in the States, but in Australia, if you're a First Nations person, an Indigenous person, your life expectancy is 31 years less than the national average, for example. That applies across a lot of the regional community of Australia and through the Pacific Islands. So you're also 200 times more likely to be the victim of significant episodes of violence, for example, 20 times more likely to have diabetes. So this topic is very important for our organisation. That statistic applies broadly to many of the First Nations people in Central and Latin America. So my view is a global view with specific interest in my countries, which are Malta and Australia, where I spend my time, but travelling a lot. Broadly, to cover your points, the first thing I think cities have learned, being in discussions with many of them every day, is that they need a narrative around the people and the place, not just about the data and the technology. You need the people to be engaged and on a journey with the city, and that means understanding what their challenges are. I would echo Ugo's points earlier that technology isn't always the solution either. intelligent urban design that allows people to live without the need for cars, the European model where you can live and work and find a hospital and find a shop and socialise in a precinct rather than the more American Australian model of rich people live here, middle class people live here, poor people live here, and their workplaces are similarly segregated, brings incredible challenges in terms of urban design. The next thing is when implementing technology through communities, it tends to be led by companies that have targets and have commercial objectives, and cities are tending to have to chase from a regulatory standpoint and from a commercial and procurement standpoint, and we see unintended consequences. And something I would speak about often, nuclear power, when it came about, it took 24 years to have a nuclear non-proliferation treaty once we realised it was bigger than anyone ever thought it could be. But that was largely controlled by government. When we mapped the human genome, similarly, our intentions were good to prevent death and cure disease, but then insurance companies used it to prejudice themselves against people and their policies. And it's an unintended consequence. We saw the same with the internet. We've now seen the same with social media, and now we're seeing, and I don't know if anyone saw Yuval Noah Harari a few days ago, but when he was talking about GPT-4 and how it worked out it couldn't solve these capture puzzles that you use to log into banks, and it called TaskRabbit and got a human to do it for it and lied about not being a robot. So now we face the prospect of sentient intelligence. How do we manage this? And we very quickly need regulatory frameworks that cities and governments are grappling with. So the next bit is that traditional organisational and procurement structures for cities don't necessarily work with these new solutions. Things, for example, fire safety would be generally designed by certain people in a building, procured from certain trades, but now you have intelligent building systems that cross over in an intelligent world, and the same in infrastructure. So there are great challenges in reforming the way that procurement takes place around certain technologies. We've talked a lot about public-private partnership and the need for collaboration, and it's true, but that can come with some great challenges. In Australia, there's a saying, if you go to bed with an elephant, you need to expect it to roll over at some point. And this is applicable, as I said, when you've got cities and states entering into contracts with corporations with balance sheets bigger than the GDP of France. I heard someone say of one of the big tech companies the other day, they don't have customers, they have hostages at a trade fair. And it is, as people know, very difficult once you're enmeshed with a large corporation delivering a critical service, whether it's airports is something we work with a lot. You can't just stop an airport. They're still using DOS systems for ticketing because you can't stop an airport. So these are some of the challenges that cities face. The next point, and we've posited the term intelligent communities rather than smart cities, which has tended to be fairly elitist. It's been presidents and professors and CEOs, not the people in the street. Now, 46% of the world doesn't live in a city. I don't think that means they don't matter. So getting a framework that is inclusive for all communities and understands that the needs of communities are different is incredibly important. We are working with the city of Dakar, Senegal at the moment, and their needs are very different from where I was in Carmel by the Sea in the States last week. They don't need 5G, they need people to be closer to water they can drink. So, these immediate needs are very different. The second part was, what can governments do to support digital transformation and education, collaboration, innovation, investigation, and regulation. I didn't intend for that to rhyme, but it sounds okay. There is so much knowledge to have, and it's not just deep technical knowledge. You need someone who can design a Tesla, but you need someone who knows to change the battery. We need the trade services level of education and training to be addressed, not just the high policy, deep technical level. genuine cross-sector collaboration, as Anthony was saying. We need the universities and academia involved in research, but then we need processes for training and education, as was articulated. We need innovation in finance. You know, we're working with organisations about the securitization of lending over data, for example. One of our thought leaders recently did an analysis on Meta, and for every single person on their platform, they earn $40,000 a year. Now, if you multiply that out at an 8% yield, that means your social media data is worth about $500,000 based on a modest return on capital. So how could we use that as an instrument for lending over cash flow in the same way that rental buildings are used? So innovation about how we design projects and how we fund and procure them is fundamentally important. And then finally, on regulation, we need to decide at what level we're going to regulate certain things. In America, we have a project in Florida that involves 78 different cities, counties, states, and departments, and getting them all to share data on a traffic project is incredibly complicated because of issues of privacy. So at what level do we want regulation, and by whom? So to finish, you asked me about digital inequality and what we can do to overcome them. I mean, digital inequality can be through lack of infrastructure, lack of access to infrastructure that's there, and that can be for social reasons, it can be from financial reasons, it can be simply physical or geographic reasons. Digital equity for the aged is a huge challenge as well, particularly in regional communities. And then finally, it can be the lack of skills or knowledge to use that asset that is available. And I talk a lot about the people, the cities that are doing the equivalent of buying an A380 and trying to drive it down a little street in Paris because they don't know how to fly it. We need not just big investment on big technologies, but we need to understand how to leverage the value from that investment. And a lot of the time that doesn't happen, and that causes a lack of trust with the community. And then it makes it harder for government to invest again because they've lost trust. And then they need to get re-elected, which is another huge problem. We're trying to solve multi-generational problems on a 4 to 6 year electoral cycle. That's a big challenge all by itself because the objectives of people are not necessarily aligned. The very last one on collaboration, you talked about regional communities working together, and there are logical things. We're trying to build a framework in Ukraine at the moment through Mayor's Club, 480 cities where, 80% of the things they need to know are the same. But then are you a tourism city, a resource city, an academic city, are you a seaport? That bit varies. But if you look, for example, at Istanbul, where Errol down there is asking us, how do we get to 30 million people into Istanbul? From 18, I'm saying I think you should be trying to get to 10. Because the money that you can invest in a regional community by partnering a big city with satellite cities is about a third of what you would need to spend in Istanbul to lift the level of infrastructure for traffic, water, data, electricity, sewage to cope with 30 million. And the well-being outcomes are exponential. Most people don't want to be in Istanbul. So I would finally land on the fact that small and big cities should collaborate, not just small cities, but their needs are very different, but can be symbiotic and can be supportive of one another.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those inputs. I take it. Thank you. Yes. Education, collaboration, innovation, regulation, and processes for training. We'll take note of those. Very, very, very important. Thank you very much, Anthony. Sorry, Corey. We'll get back to you. Before we move back to Korea, let's give the floor to our speaker from UN Habitat, David Aubrey. David, now it's over to you as well. Sorry. UN Habitat has been working also on digital transformation across cities for a while. So what do we have learned based on the experience of UN Habitat?
Thank you very much for the question. And I'll look particularly at the issue of scaling up and also at the issue of small and medium-sized cities. I think we found that impact speaks for itself from the point of view of dimming street lights when the moon is shining in Saudi Arabia and Medina, to slum dwellers in Kenya, knowing that they need to empty their latrine because a storm is coming and they need to prevent waterborne diseases being spread over the streets. So, I mean, there are examples and they speak for themselves. And we see the rising demand of local authorities to promote smart cities. We're also promoting in UN Habitat, alongside OECD and others, the concept of people-centered smart cities. And I actually really like what you're talking about, is intelligent communities. You know, that, but bringing the focus to the people and shifting from supply orientation to demand orientation. And we've found a really strong uptake from mayors who sometimes get mystified by the world of digitization, but they're now starting to understand, okay, it's people-centered, it's integrated to our own specific challenges, and we can be in the lead of formulating a strategies, our smart city strategy. So this has been really good uptake on this, and we're working on international guidelines now on people-centered smart cities, just to make the whole concept more accessible. So we're seeing good uptake on this, and we've seen good uptake on a sort of more tailored approaches that meet specific challenges. I mean, some of the key challenges we're also seeing, particularly when it comes to sort of smaller cities, we see uneven digital connectivity, so that's, you know, and particularly the smaller towns and villages are not getting such good access to internet and broadband and things like this. We're also seeing in some places a weak regulatory environment, or constantly an evolving regulatory environment, which is quite difficult for smaller local authorities to sort of keep up with. A lack of capacity, which has been said by many people here. And then also lack of interest sometimes from the private sector to engage in a small, a low ticket size investment in a small remote city. So even if they have got as far as making a smart city strategy, finding the suppliers might be difficult in certain places. Funding and finance, I think we even though to some extent probably it could be argued that smart cities could pay for themselves, there's no instruments to do so, and local authorities, and particularly in low income countries and developed and middle income countries, are often struggling to pay to keep up with the recurrent costs, rather, you know, let alone the sort of investment costs. So even though there could be an argument that smart city technologies and things like this could finance themselves from the economic and fiscal gains, there needs to be instruments to be able to actually realize this. So a lot of challenges. I think in terms of policies, I'm going to just look at maybe two areas. I think what is really important is that a lot of countries now, and particularly Africa, where I've been working mostly, Ghana, for instance, Kenya and other places, we see a real strong uptick at the national level on digital transformation. And we've seen even Kenya back in 2007, 2008, was using mobile money before most OECD countries. You know, so we've seen, they see the opportunity to really sort of leapfrog and they see this as a real impetus for development. And I think the key thing then is not to see smart cities as a kind of an add-on or an additional bonus of a digital transformation strategy, but it needs to be integrated. And I've seen how finance ministers and planning ministers work. It needs to be based on a value proposition as well. So they need to see that actually smart cities is a way of localizing a national digital transformation strategy. And what does that mean in terms of improved quality of life, improved efficiency, improved economies, and these kind of things? But there needs to be that sort of research, that kind of real evidence-based value proposition, so that national governments are putting resources into smart cities because it's going to generate an economic and fiscal benefits. And we see even the convenience in Ghana, for instance, that they're using, you know, mobile phone transactions to generate tax, you know, to get taxes. So you know, so there's a lot of incentives already in place, but integrating smart cities into national digital transformation strategies rather than a plug-in, I think, is an important thing. And but finally, coming back to the small cities, you know, you might have a very good people-centered smart city strategy that's involved all the different actors in it, that involves communities and all that, and you've got your plan. Then what? You know, there's no capacity to change that plan then into a tender, you know, to know what the standards are, know how to structure a tender, how to structure the project for financing. And even then, I've seen, even with normal projects, you know, let alone smart city projects, but basic infrastructure, I've seen so many projects either not go ahead or die halfway simply because the local authorities, especially small ones, don't understand the procurement system. And sometimes in particularly developing countries, the procurement system inherited from colonial times is way complex. And so a lot of mayors would, even if the money's there, they might not want to go through that huge process. So I do wonder whether, and then coming back to the question of suppliers not wanting to work with small cities. So I wonder whether we need to start thinking about having national facilities to support, like one-stop shops or some way of creating national facilities to support people-centered smart cities. Imagine you had 50 cities in the country all coming up with a smart cities plan. Then if that could come to a place where those projects could be aggregated, and like you said, 80% of cities want the same thing anyway, then the smaller cities could benefit from an aggregated, being part of an aggregated package, while still also by linking what their bespoke needs is with similar needs of other cities, you generate a sort of a threshold which is attractive to investors, brings down the costs, but also that sort of facility could provide that know-how you need, you know, to generate the tender, to actually structure it for finance, to actually look at the financing model of it and see whether it can sort of pay for itself or whether it you know, how to pay for it. So I think those are two kind of recommendations moving forward: is integrating smart city strategy into national digital transformation strategies, so that it does have the buy-in of national governments and support and instruments around it, but also to consider or to look more into the idea of a national facility that can aggregate projects and ensure that smaller cities are not left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divet, for these inputs. I think what struck me is what you said, is that the smaller cities, even if they have a strategic plan, the private sector kind of do not pay attention to them. This is something that we perhaps need to work on how to promote or create this interest in working with the smaller cities. Thank you very much for that. Now I'll go back to Korea. Let's see, we have sorted out the problem. Mireille, can you try again, please?
Okay, can you hear my voice?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, sorry for the wait. Thank you. And I'd like to share insight from Korea's experience with this transition to help other cities around the world enhance their own digital transition efforts. Korea has integrated digital transformation across various urban sectors such as urban regeneration and traffic management. Here are three principles that guided Korea's digital transformation policies. Firstly, Korea has tailored its digital transformation policies based on the size of the cities. For example, Korea's The Smart City Creation Project was designed to accommodate the unique characteristics of each city, providing customized solutions that have proven effective. Secondly, Korea has recognized the critical importance of developing digital capabilities. The government has supported this effort with both policy and financial support, while educational institutions are tasked with training professionals skilled in digital technology such as AI. For instance, the MORIC has been running the Smart City Innovation Talent Development Project since 2009, offering financial support about $10 million US every year to educational institutions to cultivate talent in this field. Lastly, clear role division and collaboration are crucial. The central government is responsible for policy and financial support. Local governments focus on creating demonstration projects and gathering citizen input. And the private sector contributes by developing innovative technologies, solutions, and service models. Effective coordination among this sector is a key element of successful urban governance in digital transformation. And next, I will talk about the key governance elements and future directions for digital transformation. In Korea's medium and small-sized cities, the most crucial aspect of governance for advancing digital transition is the division of roles and collaboration among the central government, local governments, and the private sector. To quickly build digital infrastructure, the central government provides policy and finance support through regulatory exemption, while the private sector works with local governments on pilot projects. For example, in Chungcheongnam-do, Korean city, a region, local authorities are partnering with private companies to develop a digital title plat map using drones and AI to manage title plat safety and fishing boundaries with financial support from the central government. Looking ahead, smart cities are expected to place more emphasis on environment aspects, such as improving energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions, due to growing concern about climate change. However, there are also concern about security and privacy as these technologies spread. To address these issues, cities will need to implement robust security measures. As this change unfolds, smaller and medium cities in various countries will need to consider these governance elements to effectively advance their digital transition efforts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mi. Thank you very much for those inputs. Very interesting. I think the point of the need to consider the local aspects of the city is a very important one. It's something that we discussed also earlier in the first session of this meeting. I'm just looking at the time, and I think I will drop the second round of questions for the speakers, but because I would like to also to open the floor to all of you to ask questions, to react to our panelists. If you have any burning question or any lesson that you can share with us from the experience of your cities or your countries, what we have learned from digitalization in your cities. If you could share it with us, that perhaps that could make it more also very, very illustrative for us. I'd like to start with, I cannot read it properly from here, but you have the floor, please.
Can you hear me?
No, could you please activate the mic?
No? All right, thank you. I'm Raymond Sana from Center for Socioeconomic Development in Geneva. We work a lot for SDGs, for UNDESA and UNOSD. And I have a dilemma, and I'm wondering whether the speakers could help out with this. Particularly, I'm thinking of you, Cory. It's the following: On one hand, of course, digitalization offers great ways to become more efficient. The efficiency gain does not necessarily mean we have effectiveness gain. And in this regard, I'm talking about the cities, SDG implementation, and where is the spirit of the SDGs? Last panel, we talked about participation. I mean, the more powerful AI gets to be, the less it involves the participants. That means us as citizens. So how could we make our best effort to continue to improve efficiency while coping with what I call the digital black box, and make sure that we don't lose our citizens? And so I'm wondering, you mentioned several times, not only First Nation, but overall, how to combine the two as much as we can.
I like that question a lot. I was speaking at an event in New York recently on this topic, and the other people on the panel wanted to talk about what are the future of jobs when AI mows your lawn for you because your lawnmower can do it and cleans the streets. Because we have this very linear idea that we have to have a job and we have to grow our businesses at 10% a year. And I asked the question, why aren't we thinking about a world where we all work 2 days a week and our parents aren't in aged care facilities anymore and our kids aren't in daycare facilities anymore, and we can start to be people again? So then you ask the question of what's the distinction between a human and all the things that AI can do, for example. And as an initiative to your point, I've just appointed our first global thought leader in ethics around digitalization and smart cities. And a question you raised, Oscar, was the ethical use of technology. And the first thing is to have an ethical position, which means you have to have a set of values and beliefs, and that'll vary. So if you look at what we've done with technology, with cars, planes, ships, elevators, we build tall buildings and we live in ways that we never did. And with all that time that we've saved, people then go home and go to the gym for 2 hours because they didn't spend any energy walking up the stairs anymore, or they're scrolling on TikTok now. So that's when the social benefit aspect of what you're talking about, to me, comes back to it. What is the actual social efficiency gained if we're just going to create new jobs to be on a supervisory board of an audit committee, of a reference panel, of a thing that actually really isn't creating anything except economic churn? And what are we actually trying to achieve? And it comes back to that point of who are the stakeholders, and it's the people, and the only place that we have to live until Elon Musk builds another planet is this one, right? So how that can't be at the beginning of every business case, I don't understand. But still, a lot of business cases aren't written with that in mind. And the point of well-being, to your point, what is the actual purpose of it all? I mean, there's linear things like streetlights where you're saving energy, and that all makes sense, right? Or saving water or waste, that all makes sense. But in terms of the social outcomes for people with these efficiency gains, and I would prefer to talk about efficacy than efficiency, because one is sort of the useful application of the saving, the other one is a saving for no particular purpose potentially, right? But this is something that, to your point, needs a lot deeper discussion around policy formation, I think.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Before I give the floor to GIZ for the next question, there is one online that says, the world has many digital twins. How might cities harness this to accelerate global and local objectives over time? If anyone, not just panelists or anyone, would like to respond to this one, please feel free to raise your flag. And also, I would like to ask Renate from Germany about these urban governance arrangements that you have implemented in Germany to collaborate across levels of government. If you could develop a little bit more on that issue, I think it's important for cities, particularly in the case of the federal Germany, how this is working for promoting digitalization in small and medium-sized cities. So, well, before you answer, I'll give the floor to Jason.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I'm Enoch Tabak from GIZ. We're implementing the International Smart Cities Network on behalf of the Federal Ministry. And my intervention would be that to date, I think still Consul and Decidim are one of the internationally most replicated smart city solutions, which, by the way, Mr. Townsend, were initially developed by volunteers indeed. And it's an open source solution. So I think we can also reinvigorate a little bit nonetheless this idea that it's not exclusively, private and industry who can carry on the open source paradigm. But my point is different. My point is, can we find, and that's our task maybe, can we find the next consuls and decidims for other smart city domains? Because these two solutions kind of organically managed to bridge the geographical gap, right? There is Japanese cities who picked up on solutions that were developed from Barcelona, Madrid, there is German cities. So the question would be, how could maybe national and local governments, help others in small cities and cities of all sizes to identify those next consuls and decidims for other smart city domains? Could that be done through marketplaces? That seems to be one of the tendencies we see. Could it be done through putting indeed such solutions on some pedestal? So Consul was receiving the UN Public Service Award, right? I understand that it's difficult for national governments to pick winners, of course, but maybe if you have transparent awards around that, it could be doable. So I think that could be some consolidation work maybe here, and I would be interested to know from the panel as well whether they see some opportunities in that regard.
Renat?
Yes, maybe I can combine your two questions. In Germany, in the program, we have something to do like squaring the circle. And that means as I said, we can't fund all the 11,000 communities on the federal level, but we can fund solutions with a model character. That's allowed. They have to be have a model character and to do something new for urban development in an experimental way. But it's not forbidden to work together. Nobody can speak out that it's forbidden for municipalities to work together. And so, for example, we have a lot of interest in digital twins. From the 30 municipalities, I think 50 are interested in realizing digital twins on energy, on the cultural heritage, on urban planning, on different ways. And we have different approaches. And we bring together the municipalities in the funding program which want to work together on specific topics. So we build working groups, for example, on digital twins, on urban platforms, on climate topics, on topics of smaller municipalities. And what we did from the national level is we wanted them not only to talk about the challenges, that is very important at the beginning, to inform, to talk, sometimes, to say what's going wrong, that has a social impact. But of course, we wanted that they make conception, realization, and business models for the later, for running the system. So we had a strong impact of the national level that these working groups really go into work, because it's so important for us to show the value. So there is to be honest, a big pressure on the funding program from the political side in the municipalities. I see the cities, but also for me, from the top level of my ministry, that you can show something, you can show solutions. And it was a hard time in the strategic period when they made only their strategy, which is very important, but the political level is very impatient. And at the end, it was me too, to see something concrete, to see the solutions, to see the impact and the value it has. So we fostered to work together, and not only to speak together, but to do to realize the solutions. And now it's coming, and it took a long time. And it's not so easy to spend all the money if, as a medium-sized town, you get 15 million euros only to do smart city topics. And you're not allowed to spend it on the classical application the citizen needs, but for improvement, for urban development, only for that. And it's not so easy to spend this money. And the political level, has to see the solutions, and now they are coming, because all the 73 model projects are in the realization of the measures. And I also went in the summertime to some of the municipalities and could see what happens, and that's the best proof that the program is on the right way.
Thank you very much, Renata, for those inputs. United Nations Environmental Program.
Yes, sorry, just one last, because the conversation actually triggered a few thoughts. So I'd like to go back to what the Smart Cities Council said about our value system and what we consider important as the route to how we use digitalization. And I would be amiss if I don't mention, from the perspective of the UN Environment Program, that there is a real opportunity in the use of the digital twins, in the use of the work that we are doing here to do modeling, scenario planning towards the triple planetary crisis. So I'm talking here about the climate emergency, addressing pollution in the long term, and of course, the biodiversity loss that we are facing. So this is a real concern that we are working on in the digital space with the cities that we work with. We've seen in our work that it not only demonstrates the feasibility of the solutions, but more importantly, and this goes back to the value system, it captures the imagination of the population. And that really, when you see, for example, the way Singapore presents how the climate solutions, and it's there, when you use digital tools to capture people's imagination and to change and transform the value system, I find that to be a very, very powerful tool. And I just want to raise the environment flag for everyone here, and we're really happy to work with anyone who wants to work in that space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that input on the use of digital technologies and the environment. Thank you very much. And the value system, I think, is rather relevant for this conversation, something that we have learned. Any other input before we close the session? This is the time. Any experience that you would like to share with us? No? Okay. With that, I think we can close this second session of the roundtable. With this one, we'll have a lunch break. We'll reconvene the meeting at 14 hours. So in this same room for session 3, that is on artificial intelligence for sustainable development. And then we'll move on to session 4, which is how to propel a successful digital transition in cities of all sizes. So the logic was this morning more about to know where we stand, what have we learned from digitalization, and now in the afternoon is where do we go from here? How do we see cities in the future? What its success looks like in the digital